Every single person who builds a career is going to make at least one serious mistake along the way. I could stand here for an hour listing every warning sign, every red flag, every mile marker, and you would still probably walk straight past at least one of them anyway. That's just how careers work. So instead of pretending you can avoid every misstep, let's do something more useful. Let's go through 6 lessons that almost everyone ends up learning the hard way, so you can at least recognize them when they show up for you. Welcome back. A lot of what I talk about comes from conversations I have helping people sort out their careers, what's working, what's stalled, and where things quietly went sideways without anyone noticing at the time. And I'll be upfront with you. I've lived through more than a few of these myself. Some of what you're about to hear is my own experience, and some of it belongs to people I know who were generous enough to let their mistakes become someone else's lesson. So think of this as a shortcut. 6 lessons, the easy way, instead of the hard way. Let's get into it. The first lesson is one you almost never see while it's happening. Somewhere early in your career, you make a decision that quietly sets the trajectory for everything after it, and you won't recognize it as a turning point until years later. Sometimes, right around the time it's too late to undo. Maybe it's staying in a role 2 years longer than you should have. Maybe a recruiter reached out about something genuinely exciting, and you didn't even respond because you were comfortable, or scared, or both. Maybe you took an offer that looked fine on paper, but never actually fit you. Maybe there was a move to a new city, a new industry, or a new specialty, and you talked yourself out of it because change felt riskier than staying put. Here's a pattern I see constantly in coaching conversations. Someone comes to me feeling stuck. They can't quite explain why their career stalled, just that something isn't progressing the way it should. And almost every time, if we dig back far enough, there's a single decision, usually made quietly without much agonizing, that ended up being the hinge point. At the time, it didn't feel like a big deal. Looking back, it's obvious. This is exactly why it's so tempting to wish you could go back and tap your younger self on the shoulder and tell them to change direction now, while it's still easy. Unfortunately, that clarity almost never shows up in the moment. It shows up years later, usually right around the time you're wondering whether it's too late to fix it. So if you're sitting on a decision right now, a possible career change, a relocation, a shift in direction, and some part of you suspects the timing matters, take that seriously. Future you is probably going to wish you had. One more version of this that's easy to overlook. Turning down a stretch assignment or a transfer because it feels inconvenient right now. It rarely feels urgent in the moment, since the comfortable option is always sitting right there. But 5 years later, that's frequently the fork in the road people point to when they describe how their career ended up somewhere they never intended. The second lesson is a hard one to accept, because it cuts against everything we're taught about being a good employee. Loyalty, on its own, rarely gets rewarded the way you expect it to. Picture this. You join a company expecting a clear path upward. Maybe there's a senior person above you who everyone assumes will move on or move up within a year or two, opening a spot for you. Except that year passes, then another, then a third. The promotion you were quietly counting on never opens up because the person above you isn't going anywhere, and you've spent years being patient instead of being strategic. This is one of the most common traps I see, and one of the most expensive. While you're sitting tight, telling yourself that putting in the time will eventually pay off, the rest of the job market keeps moving. People who switched companies, took the slightly riskier move, or pushed for a title change 2 years earlier than felt comfortable, end up several levels ahead of where you are. Not because they were better, because they didn't wait around hoping loyalty would be noticed and rewarded on its own. And the gap isn't just about title. It shows up in compensation, too. Two people with similar skill levels can end up years apart in pay simply because one of them stayed too long in a role that had stopped growing, while the other moved when the writing was already on the wall. Loyalty feels like the responsible choice in the moment. In hindsight, it's often the thing that quietly costs people the most. It's worth saying clearly, being loyal to a company is not the same as that company being loyal back, and assuming otherwise is one of the most expensive assumptions you can make early on. There's also a quieter cost that doesn't show up until a salary negotiation years later. The goodwill you built with your manager doesn't transfer to a compensation committee or a new employer's HR department. Those conversations run on market data and demonstrated impact, not on how many years you stuck around hoping things would eventually change. The third lesson follows naturally from the second. Hard work, by itself, does not lead to promotions. I wish that weren't true, but watch enough careers unfold, and the pattern is unmistakable. It's an easy trap to fall into, especially if you work for someone who treats long hours as the price of admission. Maybe your manager regularly puts in 12-hour days, and you feel pressure to match that pace just to stay visible. So you do. Nights, weekends, whatever it takes, convinced the extra hours will eventually be noticed and rewarded. Often, they aren't. Putting in more hours than everyone else doesn't automatically translate into more recognition, because recognition isn't handed out for effort. It's handed out for impact, and very specifically, for impact on the things leadership actually cares about. You can work yourself to exhaustion on a project nobody above you is paying attention to and get nothing for it, while someone working fewer hours on a higher visibility initiative walks away with the promotion. The lesson here isn't to work less. It's to work on the right things. Before you pour hours into a project, ask yourself honestly whether it's something your manager's manager would actually recognize and care about. If the answer is no, you might be working hard in exactly the wrong direction, and no amount of additional effort is going to fix that math. It also helps to get comfortable documenting your wins as they happen, rather than trusting that someone upstairs is keeping a mental tally. Invisible work, no matter how time-consuming, tends to stay invisible. Visible work, even when it took fewer hours, gets remembered at review time. Which brings us to lesson 4, and it's one a lot of people resist. Nobody is going to advocate for you the way you need to advocate for yourself. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Your direct manager usually isn't the person making the final call on your promotion. That decision tends to sit one level higher, with your manager's manager, someone who may barely know your name, let alone the specifics of what you've contributed. If that person has no visibility into your work, it doesn't matter how good the work actually is. This means treating self-promotion as part of the job, not as something distasteful you'd rather avoid. Find legitimate ways to become visible to the people who actually decide your trajectory. Speak up in cross-functional meetings. Volunteer for the project that puts you in front of leadership. Make sure that when results come in, your name is clearly attached to them, not in an obnoxious way, but in a clear, factual one. Think of it like running a small business where you happen to be the product. You need a strategy. You need a marketing function. You need to be able to clearly and confidently explain the value you bring, whether that's in a performance review, a hallway conversation, or a job interview somewhere else entirely. If that feels uncomfortable, that discomfort is exactly what's standing between you and the next level. The people who get promoted aren't always the most talented. Often, they're simply the most visible. It also helps to know the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. A mentor gives you advice in private. A sponsor talks about your work in rooms you're not in. You need both, but only one of them actually moves your career forward when the promotion list gets discussed. Lesson 5 is about something most people don't think about until it's already cost them. The specific skill you're known for today might be worthless tomorrow, and broadly relevant, transferable skills matter far more than deep expertise in something narrow. It's a strange trap. You can become genuinely excellent at something, a tool, a process, a niche specialty, and have an employer value that skill intensely for a while. They might even invest in training you further, because right now, they need exactly what you have. But the moment that need disappears, so does the value of that skill, at least to them. The danger compounds if you ever leave that company. You might discover that the rest of the industry never valued that specialty the way your old employer did. Now you're holding a resume full of accomplishments that don't translate anywhere else. People in this position tend to panic, and panic leads to settling, taking a job below where they should be just to stop the bleeding. One lower quality job tends to lead to another because each subsequent employer reads the resume and assumes that's your level. The fix is to keep at least part of your skill set pointed at things multiple employers across your industry actually want, not just whatever your current employer happens to need this year. Specialization can absolutely be valuable, but it should never come at the total expense of staying broadly relevant outside the walls of one company. You see this play out constantly with tools and platforms. Someone spends years becoming the internal expert on a piece of software that's specific to one company, only to find that nobody in the broader market has heard of it. Meanwhile, the people who kept learning the more widely used tools, even casually, on the side, never hit that same wall when it came time to look elsewhere. And the last lesson, which tends to sting the most. You are only as valuable as what you've produced recently. Past contributions have a surprisingly short shelf life. This one is hard to accept emotionally. You finish a major project, it goes well, leadership is thrilled, and it feels like you've banked enough goodwill to coast for a while. Sometimes that's true, for a few months. But that goodwill erodes faster than people expect. If leadership isn't convinced you're currently contributing, or more importantly, that you'll be contributing meaningfully in the near future, your past work stops protecting you. This is exactly why layoffs catch so many people off guard. They've done excellent work. They've built what feels like a strong reputation. And then they find their name on a list anyway, completely blindsided. It feels unfair because, in a sense, it is. But the underlying logic isn't really about fairness. Decision makers aren't asking what you did last year. They're asking what you're likely to do next year, and whether they specifically need that from you. The takeaway isn't to live in constant anxiety about your next contribution. It's to treat your career the way a free agent treats their game. Always aware of your current value, always building toward what's next, and never assuming that what you did yesterday will automatically protect you tomorrow. Putting yourself first in your career isn't selfish. It's just realistic. And the sooner you accept that, the less painful these 6 lessons will feel when they eventually show up at your door. Part of acting like a free agent is making sure your professional network doesn't live entirely inside one company. Relationships with people at other organizations, in your industry, or adjacent to it, are what make it possible to land on your feet quickly if your current contribution stops being enough for the people signing your paycheck. So that's 6 lessons that almost everyone ends up learning the hard way, usually at a cost they didn't see coming. If even one of these hit close to home, you've already got a head start that a lot of people don't get until much later in their career. Let me know in the comments which one resonated with you the most. And if this was useful, stick around. There's more like this coming. I'll see you in the next one.